I was kind of like your grandfather. Unfortunately, I modeled myself after your grandfather because he was always considered a really great guy.
Hmm. Okay.
So I modeled I mean, what could be better than that for a father model, role model? And he never took a vacation. I didn't find out that you were even in the process until it was almost over. And as I said to you at the time, and this was like 3 weeks before COVID came out or something like that, or 2, 3 weeks after that.
That's
You know,
accurate.
um, if I had known at the right time, I would have jumped on a plane and been out there because I have a lot of experience. I know what you're going through in a lot of ways. I have a lot of advice. I did everything that I knew how to do to not have that happen. We went to counseling, went to couples counseling, marriage counseling. I went to counseling. She went to counseling. The one piece of advice she gave that still haunts me is if you have young kids, don't get divorced. I didn't get a divorce because I wanted to be happy.
Welcome to the Too Dad to Quit podcast,
The podcast where we highlight stories of dads on the other side of divorce.
to inspire and give strength to dads going through it.
I'm Ben.
And I'm Yoel.
Welcome back to the Too Dad to Quit podcast. You can find us on twodadtoquit.com, Too Dad to Quit on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube. All right, we have a YouTube clips channel. Please reach out to us. We want to share your story. Everybody has a story to share, and it can help others. Don't forget to subscribe, like, share, comment, and rate the podcast. This week, we're sitting down with my father, Fred Stern. Fred is the father of and stepfather of 5 boys, 3 boys from his first marriage, one stepson, and one son from his second marriage. He is also the grandfather to my 5 children and the step grandfather of 2 children and an occasional math tutor. Fred graduated from Cooper Union with a BS in electrical engineering. During his professional career, he worked on the Atlas launch vehicle, submarines, VP of the family business, HP, and Y2 crash aversion. Fred also used to have a pilot's license and currently enjoys helping seniors with computer issues and protecting them from frequent scams. So, the episode I've been waiting for uh,
Me
finally
too.
got my dad on here. So, thank you for joining us. I'm not exactly sure where to start. However, I kind of want to start with the stories I remember growing up of you sharing of yourself as a child, because to me they were humorous, but also showed kind of how independent and smart you were. So some of those stories were things like you were 4 years old or 5 years old and you left the house and walked somewhere and from school to school around the block. Another one where you were making sandwiches in with knives and things in the kitchen. So let's start with those 2 stories, and I'll think if I can remember any more of those.
I get a lot of skepticism when I tell this story, and it's not my story really; it's your grandmother's story, because I was too young to remember it. But she claims I was hungry as a probably 18-month-old kid, and when we lived in Parkchester, and climbed up on the kitchen cabinet and took a big bread knife, the long ones, and was cutting myself some bread so I could make myself a sandwich at 18 months.
Wow.
Some people greet that story with skepticism. I can't tell you I was there, but didn't record it for anybody.
Nice. And then you, at some point, you moved to Long Beach,
When we
New
were
York.
seven, when I was 7, we moved out to Long Beach. Yeah, the story about the blocks, that was when we moved out to Long Beach. We stayed we rented a house in the center of town for a year, but then we actually bought what you know of as our house a year later. and I was moving from one school to another. I was the first house I was in the second grade, and the third house I was in the third grade. The new house I was in the third grade, and we didn't have school buses for that local school, so they uh, dropped me off at school. I was 8 years old, didn't really know the town, didn't know the house. I had a key. I guess they had a lot of confidence in me. And they said, we'll see you at home because they went to work. Well, my problem was I remembered the house was 1 block from the beach.
Yep.
My school was 3 blocks away where there were different layout to the streets. So 1 block from the beach was about a mile away from where I was. And I
Wow.
got up there and walked to that 1 block from the beach, and I walked toward where I thought the house should be, and the street ended. That was the first puzzle. So then I had to walk all the way back down to where it was 1 block again, because there were 5 blocks on one side and 1 block on the other side, and walk another 10 short blocks in that direction to finally find the house. Now, if you're 8 years old, that's a long walk,
Yeah.
probably a good couple of miles. And when I got home, I used to call my mother in the office when they went to work in New York. And she said, "What took you so long?" I had no idea where I was.
But where was your sister? You guys weren't in the same school?
Oh, no, no. She was 4 years ahead of me. So she was in junior high, which
Ah,
at that point was in what's now, what is the high school, still is the high school. When I went to junior high, they built a new junior high in Lido. But, so
got it.
she
So,
wasn't there.
so speaking of your sister, there's also this at this house that was my grandparents' house and your parents' house in Long Beach, where you grew up. There was a glass door with a lot of different glass panes, and one of
We
the
don't talk,
glass
we don't talk,
panes.
we don't talk about this.
Nobody's going to hear it. It's okay. We have so there's a glass pane in that window that in that door that was missing,
Yes.
and I was always told a story about it. But I guess I want to hear your side of the story. I don't even know where I heard the story from, but growing up,
Probably,
every time
probably
I went
never
to,
heard it. She liked to tell the story.
so I'd like to hear your side. What happened to
It's
that
the same
glass?
side. It's the same side. For many years, when I was young and smaller, then my sister is older than I am. But at that age, she was considerably bigger and taller. So we would get into a lot of fights. And there was a particular fight we had right at the top. We had a stairway, and then my room was on one side, and her room was on the other side. And we had met in the middle and had a fight, as siblings will do.
Hmm.
And so she finally got mad enough at me. I ran down the stairs, and what she did was pick up a shoe and throw it at me. Thus, we had a broken glass. The interesting part was Grandma never fixed it.
Right. What's the story with that?
I just no need to. It was a little vestibule from the outside. It was like a code room. So when you came in, the cold air or whatever didn't come into the house. A little glass in a multi glass wind door didn't make that much difference.
It wasn't. I was always told it wasn't fixed to remind you guys of that fight. That wasn't true.
No.
Huh.
Well, I mean, it could have been her excuse, but that wasn't never told us. And
Well, okay.
I wouldn't forget the fight, but it wouldn't mean anything to see the glass broken in the door.
Hmm. And so your parents, to me, were the only grandparents I knew, because I was little when my mother's mother passed away, and then my mother's father passed away way before that. So to me, they were just I don't know. She was the matriarch of the family, and Grandpa was always working. He was like the cool guy that was 6 foot something, and he did all the holidays and always watching sports. But what was it like? Because he had his own business and it was in Manhattan. He had to commute there every day, and I think Grandma used to work for him. What was that like growing up, having them working in the business? And when you were younger, who was home?
Well, when I had school, I would come home, 3 o'clock, whatever it was, and I can't remember the schedule. I guess my sister would probably be home first because she was in high school at that point most of the time. I was in elementary or junior high school. But we were just home for a couple of hours because Grandma would come home at 5:30.
Yeah,
Grandpa would come home at 6:30 and expect dinner on the table. He liked
sure.
his food at 6:30 or things were not good. He was a nice guy, but food was not to be trifled with.
Got it. Okay. So you lived in Long Beach, and then you ended up in Cooper Union, I guess, for college.
Well, that was an interesting story because when I was in high school in junior year, my physics professor, who was probably the most influential guy in my life up until that point,
Mm-hmm.
I was very good in physics. Uh, so he came in one day and handed me a piece of paper and said, fill this out. And what it was an application to go to a summer program sponsored by the National Science Foundation at Cooper Union's summer camp, really, they had in New Jersey.
Ah.
And I said, why? He said, because you're going to go. And so I filled out the application, and much to my surprise, they accepted me. So that's how I had never heard of Cooper Union before that. I was all set to go to Cornell because my sister went to Cornell.
Right.
And but Cooper had its advantages and disadvantages. And I went to the summer camp, quite a place. I mean, we learned differential and integral calculus in 2 days, and then it got hard.
Was it like the first time you felt challenged, or was around a bunch of people that thought like you?
Um, my In high school, I was part of what they called an IGC class, intellectually gifted children.
Mm-hmm.
So from freshman year, I was in the class with these other
Uh-huh.
smarter kids. We had 400 kids in my high school class. So we got a pretty good representation of smart kids.
Right.
I got thrown into that mix. Math and science, I was the best, but doesn't mean the others were far behind. Uh, the other two subjects, they threw me out because I was terrible in history and English, which was okay with me because there was a lot of work and I wasn't into that.
Yeah. Okay. So from there, you were a shoe-in for Cooper Union, or like
Well,
they chased you?
I applied to Cornell for early acceptance. I applied to Cooper Union. Cooper Union, when they give you they narrow things down. Okay, they have room for 100 total engineering students in their 4 disciplines, and they take 400 of the applicants. And it's a free school. In case people don't know, Cooper Union at that time, and it's not exactly now, but they're heading back was a free tuition school.
Mm.
So they had a lot of applicants, mostly from Brooklyn Technical High School, if you know where that is, Bronx High School of Science, Stuyvesant School in New York. Those were the top three schools in New York City, and they took a lot of kids from there, but they did take some from outside. And I did apply. And what they do is they accept 400 students through stage one,
Mhm.
where they then give you 6 hours of testing.
Wow.
Yeah. I'm not that smart, but I'm a very good test taker.
Mm.
And this was brutal. This was absolutely brutal. And one of the good things is one of the tests was a psychology test to find the people they didn't want to accept. So if you didn't say stupid things, you passed that one.
Right.
It's amazing how many people do say stupid things. Because when I did get accepted, and I went to talk, and I still communicate on Zoom with what's left of my class.
Wow.
And I told them the story about I went to interview the dean of admissions, and they said, "You what?" I said, "Well, I got into Cornell, I got into Cooper. I wanted to get the full stories." So I went to see him, and we had a nice chat. And I asked about that test, and he gave me some of the examples of answers and why these kids are not being considered.
Mhm.
Mm.
It's fascinating, but they gave us an advanced physics test, and I did very well on the physics regents in New York, if you know what that is.
Like standardized testing.
Yeah, standardized testing. Somebody said I got the highest mark in New York State.
Wow.
Because more people flunked that test than normally should have.
And this is all on top of SATs.
This on top of SAT. You need a good SAT just to get into the test.
And how did you do
I was one of the top students. He
on
showed me the
SATs?
scores. On the local test. They had very high hopes for me, which I did not confirm.
Okay.
I did not
Uh,
do as well in college as I did in high school.
so are there any interesting college stories? Because I only know the interesting graduation story, which just for all the listeners, my father's face just did a weird contortion. The story that it was graduation and the big computer that was taking up a whole room wasn't working, and the story that I know is they took you off the stage to go and help them fix the computer.
No,
So you can tell me the real story, but that's the story I got.
that didn't happen.
None of that happened.
None of that happened. Not that I remember. We had a graduation. They didn't
Okay.
pull me out of anywhere to do anything.
Did you ever save the day by fixing some computer that nobody else could?
Well, I was typically the one to call. I mean, this went on. I mean, when I was in the third grade, now my father took a lot of movies, and this is the 8 millimeters with the hand crank, and everything else. So we had a projector, and of course he was non-mechanical. So from the time I was 6 or 7 or 8, I was running the projector.
Mm.
So if we had a film in the auditorium in any school I was at, and it stopped working. I don't know if you guys ever watched film projectors. They have a tendency to, if you don't make the loops in the right place, the right size, they have a tendency to mess up.
Yep.
So every time that happened, the projector went off, and the word went out, "Where's Fred?" So yeah, I did that frequently. When it got to computers, I typically helped out with computers, but I don't believe it happened during graduation that I remember anyway.
Did you like that role?
Yeah,
Being
I
the
still do it. I
senior?
mean, if you look at what I do with the seniors, it's the same role, and I get paid just as well.
Got it. Okay, so you graduated Cooper Union, and then your first job out of there was
In San Diego, working on the Atlas launch vehicle.
which is what? exactly.
Yeah, well, it was a missile that was our first real missile that we put in silos all over the country. But they were done filling the silos when I got there. They were using it as a launch vehicle. John Glenn was launched on an Atlas, and I
The
worked.
the astronaut.
Yes,
Huh.
astronaut slash senator. He was the first man to go around the Earth. All the others were suborbital flights that were done with a Redstone rocket.
Hmm.
So, if you saw the movie Numbers or something like that, it's where the women would do all the calculations at
Oh
NASA.
yeah. What was
Okay,
it called? Yeah.
it's something like Numbers or something like that. Anyway, um, I worked with all those people, but not at
Hmm.
NASA. I worked at General Dynamics on the vehicle itself. Um, so I got there just a year, I think. I got to look up the dates, but I got there probably a year after it was launched. Heard all the stories on the other side of the story,
Behind the scenes.
behind the scenes that you don't
Any
know about.
anything you can share?
Well, it's probably too late to get them in trouble now.
Probably.
Nothing technical, but they when they had it on the launch pad, there was a part that failed,
Hmm.
and they said I was in failure analysis, so they sent it back to the group to find out what was wrong, fix it, and send it back so they could launch the vehicle. Well, they sent it back. They couldn't find the problem,
Hmm.
and uh, they didn't want to send it back,
Sure.
but they had no excuse not to send it back.
Mm.
So they told the guy that drove the forklift, make sure this doesn't make it to the truck.
Wow.
Mm.
So somehow there was an accident and the forklift ran it over.
Wow.
And they got to use the backup one, which they had much more confidence in. So,
And
you don't,
and everything went as scheduled.
and everything worked. That was the miracle of that. You know how many
Wow.
pieces that go into these things? It's amazing.
Wow.
So that so you went from missiles to submarine. Is
Well, it's
that
still missiles, only instead of putting them in the ground or on the Vandenberg or Canaveral launch pads, they went on a submarine and they cruised around underwater. But it wasn't an Atlas. At that point, it became the Polaris missile.
and
That was,
these not torpedoes? They were actual missiles.
oh yeah, rockets. Just like the Atlas, shoot it
And
and it goes.
and were you like a government contractor, or you just worked for like defense contractors? Or
Well, Lockheed built the missiles. Electric Boat, General Dynamics Electric Boat builds the submarine. So
Mhm.
Lockheed was in charge of installing the missile systems and checking out the missile systems. So I was a field engineer. So I worked for Lockheed out of their field office across the street from Electric Boat.
Hmm.
And we installed the missiles, checked it out, made sure everything was working, the wiring was right, which it never was. And the
Okay.
interesting part is that the wiring between our missile and our control center was installed by Electric Boat.
Hmm.
And Electric Boat was in charge of the testing. So
Uh-huh.
whenever something failed, they said, Lockheed, you have a bad problem. And it would take us whatever time to track it down and say, well, no, it's not our problem. It's your wiring is not installed properly. So we had to prove it to them that it was their problem, and then they would go fix it.
And so I'm just trying to figure out what got you into missiles. Was it just the opportunity of a work? How did you?
Yeah, yeah. Um, well, I mean, you got to understand, we skipped a piece here,
Okay.
which is I wanted to be an astronaut.
Oh, that's
Mm.
interesting. So did I.
Okay.
I did not. I did
We
not know
didn't,
that.
we didn't make it. Um, so
Well,
when my path was going to be, I was going to join the Navy and become a test pilot.
Right.
out of
Right.
college, and then leverage that into being an astronaut.
Hmm.
Um, my eyes, I wasn't wearing glasses in those days, but my eyes flunked me out of the physical. There was a lieutenant commander or a commander who was giving me eye tests.
Hmm.
And he said to me after checking them 7 times, um, you've got an astigmatism. So when you're making a night landing on a carrier in a thunderstorm 20 years from now, you might have a problem.
Hmm.
And I said to him, I'm not sure I want to be making a night landing in a thunderstorm on a carrier 20 years from now. Well, if you don't want to be a career man, we don't want you.
Huh.
But they did actually offer me a position as the radar guy, the
Yeah.
number two, the electronics officer. But I really
No.
didn't want other people flying me around.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Sure.
So I declined. So then it was down to, okay, let's see where I can get a job. And General Dynamics came to, that was the good old days. General Dynamics came to the school
Ah.
and interviewed people and offered me a job. And it was as far from New York as possibly you could get and still be in the United States. So I said, great.
Hmm.
Got it.
So
Okay.
that's how
So
I wound up there.
so eventually you were able to live out your pilot dream.
Yeah, while I was in San Diego, I started to learn how to fly, started taking flying lessons. Um, they actually ran out of things to do, so I was laid off there. And then I got hired by Lockheed. So I went from San Diego to San Jose basically for
Mhm.
training before I went to Connecticut for electric boat. And I finished my pilot training in San Jose at San Jose Airport, which is now a busy metropolitan airport, but in those days it didn't have commercial flights. Just a
Mhm.
nice airport. So I learned to fly there, got my pilot's license. And I think the day or a week after we got my pilot's license, your mother and I rented a plane and flew down to San Diego for the
Oh wow.
weekend.
Wow.
She
Wait,
made
she was
my
up.
instructor swear that I would be okay.
That's good. She was in San Jose with you?
Well, when I got hired, it was, I don't know, let's say March, something like that. I don't remember exactly. And she was teaching in San Diego, so she couldn't
Right.
come with me then. So when her job was over, we packed up the convertible and drove up to San Jose. And then when that training was over, we packed up the convertible and drove to Connecticut.
Got it. Okay. And so I only know a little bit about this plane. So, and the pilot stuff. So eventually you ended up sharing a plane with somebody. Is that the only plane you have? Or were there other planes?
I only owned a piece of one plane, but I was in a flying club up at Teterboro for several years. That's where I got my instrument rating. It's cheaper to be in a club than to own a plane
I bet.
by a lot, although today's planes are much, much, much more expensive, all because of insurance, not because of the plane.
Mhm.
Hmm.
Um, so I got my instrument license. And for anybody interested out there that wants to become a pilot, get your instrument rating, then you are a real pilot. Otherwise, you're missing a lot of stuff.
Hmm.
What do they teach you in the instrument rating? That's
I look at it this way: it takes, at least when I did it, 40 hours to get a VFR license. In other words, we can fly in good weather. It takes
Mhm.
200 hours to get an instrument rating.
Wow.
Hmm.
Okay, it's not all training, but it's 40 hours of training in addition to the other training, and you've got a lot more experience. And you learn how to fly in clouds. Good percentage of accidents are pilots who really don't know how to fly on instruments, get into a cloud and crash. Your life
Right.
expectancy once you fly into a cloud, if you're not instrument rated, is about 30 seconds.
Hmm.
Right. So speaking of, so you had this, it was a Cessna that you shared?
Never, never.
No, what was it?
Piper, the flying club had several Piper Cherokees, Piper Cherokee, Piper Arrow, which is a retractable gear version of a Cherokee, Cherokee 6, which is a bigger six-passenger fixed gear or in those days, Cherokee, which six-passenger may not seem very big, but when you're used to flying a four-passenger plane,
There's an
it's like an
extra,
airline. It's like an
yeah.
airline. You turn the controls and you count to three before the plane starts to turn. You're
Hmm.
not used to that. So it was interesting.
What was it? I'm curious. What was it that made you want to fly? Like, was it because you're I don't know if you've heard your son describing himself as an adrenaline junkie, and I'm curious if you would describe yourself the same way. The Ben of today, when you were that age or younger, your 20s, 30s, like what was it to fly? Was it more utilitarian, like you just wanted to get from point A to point B faster, or was it about the excitement of getting up in the air and controlling the machine yourself?
Well, you got to go back to when I was 7 or 8 or 9 years old, and my favorite TV show was Captain Video.
Hmm.
Captain Video was about these uh, astronauts basically that flew their rocket ship at the incredible speeds of 1,000 miles an hour.
Hmm.
That actually wasn't from Captain Video. That was, have you heard of Flash Gordon?
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. But one of the famous lines from the Flash Gordon is the announcer saying, Flash Gordon is on his way back to Earth at the incredible speed of 1,000 miles an hour.
Yes.
Oh, come on.
I, I just saw a movie that parodied that. I can't remember which one it was. They actually had Flash Gordon have a cameo on them in the movie, but I don't remember which one. But anyway, yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, I was into space, science, travel since I can remember. And flying was just part of that next step. I do not enjoy and still didn't enjoy boring holes in the sky.
Hmm.
Once I got my pilot's license, I when I first learned to drive, I would drive anywhere, anytime, anyhow, for anywhere, anybody, any length, and it'd be no problem. Once I got my pilot's license, if I was in the car more than an hour, I started to fall asleep
Wow.
because I
Yeah.
could have been there already.
Huh.
You know,
That
uh,
sounds like the Ben I know. Interesting.
so it was very utilitarian. When after I got my license, I took Ben's mother and his older brothers, and we flew to California from New Jersey and back in one piece. Grandma saw the airplane one time. Uh, I was out doing something with the airplane, actually servicing some stores. By plane was easier, and landed at Teterboro, and they picked me up because we were going to your Uncle Bob's mother's funeral, I think,
Uh-huh.
and they picked me up at the airport, and she saw the plane. She said, "You're gonna go to Florida with that? Yeah, California with that? Yeah, why not? No problem."
Uh, yeah. So
That's
don't
funny.
not to turn this into a downer, but so you had a pepper. You had the plane you shared was a pepper jack. Is that what you said? Pepper
No,
something.
Piper. The
Piper.
plane. Once things got more serious, I had the opportunity to buy a share of a airplane that was near us in Manila.
Uh-huh.
So I bought into that. That was a Piper Comanche. Now
Got
that's
it.
an older plane, but where a Cherokee or a Cherokee Arrow will cruise at 160 miles an hour. And it's a very safety oriented airplane. Like it had automatic landing gear. You couldn't land it with the gear up. It just wouldn't let it happen.
Mm-hmm.
Comanche was an older plane, but it would do 180, 190 miles an hour, which really makes it go faster,
Hmm.
Right.
especially against the wind. If you're going against the wind, that wind is terrible in a smaller plane. So it was much faster. We had one of our partners land and accidentally put the gear up instead of turning off the engine. So that wasn't
Uh-huh.
good. Things like that.
It just went plop.
Yeah.
Nice.
Wow.
Yeah. You don't want to do that. You try not to do that.
Right.
And he was very experienced. He was he used to train people for World War II. He was a very
Wow.
experienced pilot. He could fly backwards kind of thing. Nothing bothered him in the air. Just, whoops, wrong switch.
Wow.
Had another one, and when he left, we had another pilot who was a former American Airlines chief pilot out of New York.
Wow.
He turned 60 and you couldn't fly anymore in those days for the airlines. So he joined our club. And the fun part was, of course, he was a very accomplished pilot, but he couldn't get the Comanche off the ground very well
Mm-hmm.
because he was used to the airlines where you do everything slow and easy. And the Comanche had what was called a laminar flow wing, which meant that it was very fast and not very stable.
Mm-hmm.
You had to keep track of it. Whereas the Arrow was made to be a kinder, gentler kind of airplane.
Mm.
So he said, come with me one day and show me how to take this thing off the ground. And we get in the plane, we go down the runway, go down the runway, go down the runway. I'm waiting for him. And he gently, like a 747,
Yeah.
he's pulling back very gently. And I just grabbed the control wheel because it's dual controls. And I
Yeah.
went, yank. He almost jumped out of his seat, but the plane was off. But
Nice.
that's what you had to do in that airplane. So it's like, wow, fun game.
Right. So then I guess there was tragedy that happened with the plane that you were sharing, and
Yeah,
that was the end of the plane.
that was the end of the plane and piloting. And yeah, one of our partners was flying back from a vacation he had taken with his family and got disoriented. Remember, I was talking about IFR. He was instrument rated, but we don't really know if the instruments failed or he was in the clouds and he lost track, or we don't know exactly what the cause was, but he lost track of what was going on and spun in South Carolina into a swamp. That was
Wow.
not a good thing.
Mm.
My brother always taught. I think he said that he landed the plane. Is that possible?
He took it off. I don't know if he landed it.
But he took off.
He was like 5 or 6. But what people don't know is that flying an airplane in general is a whole lot easier and safer than a car, if you know
Mm-hmm.
what you're doing. Okay, you can't run off the road very easily.
That's true.
And that's the bottom line. If you're distracted and you start to turn back. You're in most cases not going to hit it.
Mm.
So he was 5 or 6 and sitting in the right seat. I was in the pilot seat on the left.
Right.
And he couldn't see over the visor's pretty high. He couldn't see over the visor, but he could see the instruments.
Mm-hmm.
So I said, you steer down the runway with your nose wheel thing with the rudder pedals.
Mm-hmm.
I said, I'll keep it straight and I'll put the power on. I want you, and I tell you, just pull back and you'll see on the artificial horizon, you'll see it go up a
Right.
little. And just hold it up about, this much. We go down the runway and I say, okay, now. And he pulls back, he takes off. And I keep telling him what to do. And he flew around for an hour.
Nice.
And lined us up. I think we probably had him line us up for the landing, but I had to do the actual landing. It does take,
Wow.
you got to be able to see, it helps.
Yeah. Yeah. So these are like the stories I heard growing up that I missed, being like 12 years younger than my older siblings.
Yes, that's your fault.
But well, that's debatable, I suppose. But I did get to go to Disney quite often growing up, and so that was some of it was once a year. That was my I don't know. I feel like I had two childhoods. One was when you took over Grandpa's business or were working with Grandpa, and I don't know. I guess things were good money wise. So we had like yearly vacations to Disney. Um, I don't know. And then after, I guess, before the company collapsed and after the company collapsed, in my brain were two different situations for me. Those
Not
things kind
accurate,
of.
not accurate, but I don't think it matters to any of your viewers. But no, that wasn't the case. Uh,
Okay.
I was kind of like your grandfather. Unfortunately, I modeled myself after your grandfather because he was always considered a really great guy.
Hmm. Okay.
So I modeled I mean, what could be better than that for a father model, role model? And he never took a vacation.
Hmm.
Mm.
And when I was 10 years old, your grandmother said, "We're going on a vacation." And we spent 6 weeks driving around the United States. And bear in mind, there were no interstate highways
And no air conditioning.
and no air conditioning. So we spent 6 weeks driving 10,000 miles across the north of the United States, down from San Francisco to San Diego, back through Arizona, New Mexico, and up probably up Route 66 is my guess. I
Wow.
went to hit Yellowstone Park, hit Yosemite, hit the Badlands, hit Dells of Wisconsin. Um, we stayed at a motel outside of Chicago in a town called Long Beach,
Huh.
Michigan.
Mm.
Right on the shore of Lake Michigan. You could walk. That lake is so nice. You could walk out for at least a half a mile and not get over your waist.
Oh, wow.
Mm.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Um, that was one vacation. And of course, he wasn't there to run the business when that happened, and the business almost collapsed.
Hmm.
So he didn't want to do that again.
Right.
But
Mm.
we did. So I basically never really was into vacations. The vacations we did take were to your mother's family in San Diego. And I think you were too young when we went to Hawaii when Mark was bar mitzvah. That was probably before you were born.
Before my time.
Yeah. So we went there. But our vacations were kind of pilgrimages back to San Diego.
Hmm.
One time we did fly the plane out there, which was fun. You were, and by the way, one of the times we went to San Diego, we did rent the plane out there, and you were in your mother's lap flying up to San Francisco to see Aunt Roberta. We have pictures of you. They were building Aunt Roberta's house at the time.
Wait, I was in a plane you were flying?
Yeah, yes, you were in her lap.
Who
We
has
were.
those pictures?
That's a good question. We got a billion pictures. We don't know where they are. But
Okay, so it didn't
they
happen.
were building her house. So your mother sat down to feed you on her fireplace, ledge in front of
Mantle.
the
Yeah.
fireplace, not the mantle, the ledge
Hmm.
in front of the fireplace so she could feed you because there was no furniture or anything. We have a picture of you there. And so Phil and Eli were in the back, and you were in your mother's lap in the front seat.
Mm.
Huh. Okay, news to me. I thought I never flew with you. All
Oh, you
right.
did. You
So
did.
the
You loved
plane.
it. You loved it.
So the plane crashed. I was alive when the plane crashed,
Yeah,
or
it was 1980,
huh?
81.
Wow.
You were
Okay,
alive.
so what? So what's the real story about Disney? If that was the backstory, you didn't take vacations.
Yeah, well, I wasn't the one that picked Disney.
Okay.
My current spouse is the one that wanted to go to take a lot of vacations, and B, go to Disney.
And how is that transition for you in mindset?
Horrible.
No, I also I don't really deal well with vacations either. I'm always doing something. You can ask Yoel.
Yeah, I was just thinking that. Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of the genetics now. It's very interesting. That's why I'm mostly silent. I'm just watching the interaction along with the audience, soon to be.
Yeah, and I have to ask. I mean, I'm more than happy to share this wonderful life I've been leading here. But when you say too dad to quit, I mean, what I would envision is a help uh, series on. Okay, your wife just told you, or you just told your wife it's time to split up, what do I need to know?
Mm.
You know, you may have, I honestly haven't listened to all of the episodes, that's for sure. I don't know if you've done any of that, but um, I didn't find out that you were even in the process until it was almost over. And as I said to you at the time, and this was like 3 weeks before COVID came out or something like that, or 2, 3 weeks after that.
That's
Uh,
accurate.
um, if I had known at the right time, I would have jumped on a plane and been out there because I have a lot of experience. I know what you're going through in a lot of ways. I have a lot of advice. I have a lot of friends. I can give good advice when I put my mind to it. I don't often do that, but I can do it. And I've helped a lot of my friends who have gone through divorces and things like that because the pattern is much the same for everybody. Um,
Do
and
you feel, Mr. Stern, that advice, I don't know what, I mean, our wizard Ben could do editing if any of these questions are too personal or whatever, but from my limited understanding in your instance, like this, let me ask it generally. Is your advice different if somebody is quote unquote the initiator of the divorce versus somebody is on the receiving end of somebody else who's initiating it? Or is your advice more in general about the whole idea of divorce? Like, would you tailor your advice differently based on who is, the initiator or the initiatee?
um, not much. Okay, because in my experience, with the people I have worked with, and it's the men, the fathers, uh,
What's the father's?
that I work with. I don't counsel women on divorce.
Oh, got it. Okay, yeah.
Okay, but the men I have worked with, the general feeling whether they started it or the wife started it is the same. It's their fault. They did something wrong. They need to give the wife everything she needs. Um, they bend over backwards. Uh, and generally speaking, it's not true. Generally speaking, it's a 50-50 deal, no matter who starts it. And it needs to be looked at that way. And you can't give up all your rights because it's harder to get them back. I think Ben can speak to that. Once you give up things, it's very hard to get them back.
Mm.
So that's the time when you need to exert yourself and make things happen the right way. Uh, and even giving advice like that is extremely difficult because that's the mindset there. So I can't just come along and say, hey, listen, do this, because they won't listen and they won't do it. It takes a lot of just walking through the steps and talking about it and giving them an opportunity to say, well, what's going to happen 3, 5, 10 years from now? How's this going to affect everything? How
Mm.
do you feel about all that? Okay. What are you going to wish you did differently?
Mm.
So I think that should be your first show for those in this stage. You know, you have all the other stages, which of course are important once you get past that.
Mm-hmm.
But you got fathers that don't know how to cook. You got fathers that don't know how to change a diaper if that's appropriate. Okay. My first 2 kids, I wouldn't touch. I was afraid. I'd never had that kind of experience. I never babysat or anything when I was a kid. I was the young one. So I didn't, I just was afraid to hold them. I would do something bad.
Mm.
Um, when Ben came along, things changed quite a bit. I was in charge of Ben at night when he was always up.
Mm.
Hasn't changed.
And I learned very quickly that if I turned the right channels on the TV, and in those days we only had, 6 or 7. When I turned the right channels on the TV and they played classical music, that he would calm down and go to sleep.
Hasn't changed.
I want to get back to what you were saying about you if you would have known earlier, but just before that, if I from what I know of Ben's story, so he was a baby when you got divorced, right, Mr. Stern? So what was that like? You know, like you said, you were holding Ben and you were very much involved. At the same time, your marriage was kind of falling apart, right? So that must have been really challenging to be dealing with not, I mean, you love Ben obviously, but what was that like? You know, sort of being the father while you're watching, your marital life kind of slipping away.
Well, that was very tough. I mean, I did everything that I knew how to do to not have that happen. We went to counseling, went to couples counseling, marriage counseling. I went to counseling. She went to counseling. Uh, Counseling helped me. She didn't seem to get the benefits that we were hoping for,
Mm.
and it just didn't work out. So then was the hope, the glue, and
Mm.
the promise didn't work. So, but I mean, we may have separated when he was like a year old, but we didn't actually get divorced until 4 years later.
Mm.
So I still had him for some evenings and nights and stuff like that. As he got older, he would come over to the house I was living in and have dinner and things like that.
Mm.
So we took vacations. We took Ben with us. We went to work in different states. Take Ben on the trips. I would have to put him in daycare, which he was thrilled about. I still have the bruises. But I did the best I could to keep contact, to keep things, I guess I would say normal, which is not a good word, but to keep things normal with him. The biggest problem I had in that area, from my point of view, was his mother was supposed to coordinate with me all big decisions, and she coordinated nothing.
Mm.
And she started sending him to Hebrew day schools in different towns, in different states, without my permission, and
Mm.
nothing I could do about it. I mean, yeah, I could have gone to court and spent a lot of money on lawyers, but she'd probably do it again anyway.
Mm.
So one of the things that led to the divorce was there was no real discussion.
Mm.
There was no reasoning. So got to me.
Even while you were married, you're saying like the communication wasn't there.
Yeah,
Mm.
and then it would get good for a while. Something would happen, and I'm not saying something between us, just something would happen. She would change the way she reacted.
Mm. And how long was it until you got remarried? How long after the divorce, I guess? Yeah.
Well, we separated. Um, and it was about 5 years, 4 or 5 years before I met my current wife. We didn't get married until 6 years after that.
Mm-hmm.
We were together in about 4 or 5 years.
Was that because you just felt like, do you think there's like a trauma? Like this is something that comes up a lot in discussions on and offline. Do you think there's like a trauma that men or maybe I don't know anything about your current wife, but men and women, let's say, have after a divorce, they're kind of like, scared to get into that sort of binding, committed marriage? Or is it more like why should I type of thing, like, because it is pretty common, right? Especially second time around, people don't seem to rush into marriage so quickly.
Well, I don't think there's a reason to rush into marriage. I do believe that you should get married. I wanted to get married. And in my experience, I have not come across men or women that didn't want to get remarried. They always say, oh, my last ex was a terrible person. My new spouse won't be.
Mm.
I know better. Now that
Mm.
doesn't always work out, but that's the feelings I've come across.
Right. Does one tend to like look at, it seems to me like as an outsider, I mean, I've been in a relationship and not sort of anything longer, not like long term, not like 2 years, 3 years. Do you find that the new spouse or the new partner kind of takes on the role as like the savior, quote unquote? Like, this is very simplistic, maybe even a juvenile question, but I'm curious about the perspective. Like, it's very easy, let's say, for somebody to look at their ex-spouse as like the devil, like the symbol of all that is bad. I'm not talking about Ben's mother specifically. I'm talking general. It's very easy to have that sort of mentality and then feel like this new person in someone's life is like, thank God, like this is everything that's good. Is that a very simplistic way to look at it? Because, my view as I was getting divorced, I had said to my then wife, I had said to her, like, I understand, like, it's not working, right? And if this is what you want to do, this is what you want to do. But I know that the next person is going to have her own issues. And the next one, whoever, I'm not so naive as to think that the next person who comes around is going to be, this princess who's perfect. So I always wonder about that. Like, do people that get into those second marriages see same sort of ideas? Like, okay, now we've got different issues to work through. Or is it more like, I could breathe again, and like, it's just, it's so much better. If I don't know if that question makes sense, but because
Well,
I'm
it makes
trying
a
to,
lot of sense, but I
yeah.
have a one-word answer.
Just like your son,
I
his
got a
answers to
one-word
me,
answer. The answer
yeah,
is baggage.
is what?
Baggage. The longer
Baggage.
the longer you're with somebody, the more baggage there is.
Hmm.
Okay, so when you meet somebody new, there's no baggage.
Hmm.
Okay, so right off the bat, they're perfect. Okay, it takes time to accumulate the baggage. If you're smart, you've learned that, okay, baggage is normal. I can deal with it. Let's keep going. Okay. I don't know what Ben thinks. Thought about his mother, but I always cared for her. I tried to even during the divorce, I took care of her as best I could in terms of setting her up with bank accounts and financials and everything else. Uh, I would always ask her if she needed anything, and she'd always say no, by the way. She never talked to me, which was consistent
Hmm.
with her issues. Okay. But I would have been much happier if I were able to just continue on with her. But it was causing me a lot of issues and I couldn't take it.
Hmm.
You mentioned giving advice, and if you could do it all over again, is there anything you would have done differently at the time of the divorce?
At the time of the divorce, I think it's too late at that point.
I'm saying if you were still getting divorced, but you were putting together agreements or
Oh,
that kind of thing. Like if you gave advice to yourself then, yourself now to you back then, what would you tell them?
there was a dynamic going on back then that I wasn't totally aware of until after the divorce was final, which was one of your brothers. Because the judge asked all three of you, but he really only paid attention to the older two, who
I
they
remember.
who they would rather live with.
I remember.
Your oldest brother said your mother, but he didn't count because he was almost 18 and he was out anyway. The next brother said he would rather live with his mother,
Really?
really. And not until after the divorce did he say, because what your mother was pushing for was to be able to move you, three of you, out to California.
Where she had support.
where she had support. And I was going, no, I want you here. So the judge was going to decide that as well as the divorce. The trouble was your mother did not have any job or anything in California. So he couldn't just say, okay, take the kids and go live there with no income.
Mm-hmm.
So he said, I'll give you a chance to do this. He said, I'll let you go to California and we won't make any decision about the kids until X months, 3, 6, 9, whatever it is later. When you get a job, you get settled, and then we'll see how things are. Meanwhile, I would take care of you until that next step.
Mm-hmm.
She wouldn't do it. She thought he was pulling a Solomon on her.
Mm.
Legit.
Which I don't think was anywhere near the case. I think he was being very nice.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't happy about it. But anyway, your brother said her because he was hoping to move to California.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
And when everything was settled and finalized and they stayed in New Jersey, he left her and moved in with me.
Uh-huh.
Mm.
I said, hey, if you did that, before this, things would have been a lot easier.
Mm-hmm. Right. So just for our audience, so basically my oldest brother and I live with my mother, and our middle brother lived with my father.
Mm.
Which also kind of, I don't know. We weren't as close with our middle brother because he wasn't around.
Well, the funny part was when she was pregnant, middle brother couldn't wait to take care of baby.
Mm-hmm.
And older brother was, I don't want. And then as things turned out, after, I think 4 days of seeing a baby and what it was like, he didn't want anything to do with it. And older brother took over. So it was a very interesting process.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So you went from being a father of 3 to a father of 1?
Well, I'm still a father of 3.
I know, but like having 3 kids around all the time to having just 1 full time.
Yeah. But, again, we live, what, a mile and a half away?
I suppose.
Oh, you wouldn't know.
I remember 1 house, but I don't, 2 house. I think I remember 2 houses. One of them was like a little tiny condo somewhere.
Yeah, that was the
And
last house I lived in down there. Yeah.
I remember like ants attacking the kitchen, and there were ants like cover the entire floor in the kitchen.
We've had that happen a few times in different houses. I just can't remember which one that was.
Yeah, I don't know.
Insects are wonderful things. They decide to move. If it happens to be in your direction, it's not pretty.
Yeah. Okay. So to answer your question, part of the pod, there's two aspects to it, or 3. The idea is to let dads out there that going through divorce, or divorce, know that they're not the only ones going through the same thing. Like you said, it's usually the same kind of experiences, and it's having our audience listen and hear from all different backgrounds and everything, that it's kind of the same experience. 2 is to show that life goes on. So we didn't talk about what you did, how your career went after. And then also we do have our guests always share some advice that they would give as well. But it's kind of up to our guest if they want to dive into their divorce experience or not. So some episodes we do, some episodes we don't. That we leave up to the guest how much they want to share of their experience.
I mean, that's fine. If I were tuning in for the first time, I would be looking for that in my book.
Mm.
You don't focus on it. That's all.
Yeah, more because we want to focus on the positivity, uh, and you know, when you're in it, you think this is the worst, and it's never like I don't know how I'm going to get through the next day, or I'm in court in a court battle, and this is horrible, and it's just not worth it, or we have to move back into my parents' house because I don't have any money anymore. So we kind of want to lift them up and give them hope that it may take 4 or 5 years before you can get restarted and figure out, as I like to say, recalibrating your life uh, to the next stage. But as people that are we like to have people on that are on the other side and have continued and hopefully maintain that relationship with their kids. We actually have one guest that didn't speak to his kid or see his kid for over a year. And within the last few months, he actually has now reconnected with his kid. So it's important to share those stories as well because everybody has their own little situation. But we like to focus more on the positive because we could talk about divorce all day, all night, and it may go in ways we don't want. We don't want that conversation to go.
That's understandable.
But on that note, this is a two dad to quit podcast. So we like our guests to share with our audience a two dad to quit moment, a moment when you were proudest of your being a dad, and when you think of that moment, your face lights up. Yeah, that'd be great.
Well, you sent that to me, and my thoughts went directly to you, which may be surprising to you, but you didn't communicate a lot when you were growing up, and that goes up until yesterday. Hard to get a lot of communication out of you, although we've been doing better lately. Thank you. But that doesn't mean that I wasn't watching your progress. Like everything about you from when you were leading youth groups out on Long Island to the different jobs you've done, especially in Israel, where you've been always really a key star employee, member of the team. It's made me very proud to see how you've grown and succeeded. Hopefully because of my work ethic.
Yeah, growing up, I always thought I was going into the family business till I was about 8, when the family business didn't exist anymore. So,
I was very
to
successful as a leader there, yes.
To me, I feel like I come from a family of entrepreneurs, and that's what I was going to do. And school didn't really matter. So I've always kind of marched at my own drum and followed whatever I wanted to do, and nothing was going to stop me. But it was it was really like an awakening moment when I was in school, and I thought I had nothing. I didn't care. It didn't matter. I was just going to go. Like I said, I have 2 lives. I have when the company existed, when the company didn't exist. And so until that point, I thought I was just going to be another Stern in the Stern business and continue doing that. And it would be the family business. Even today, I wish I can figure out how to get the family back in a family business.
What business is that?
The sock business.
Oh,
yes.
Okay. I always thought when you said family business, you meant the computer business.
I don't know. In my head, it didn't make as much money as the sock business, but I could be totally wrong.
Depends on the year.
Right.
Okay.
People always need socks. I don't know.
Yeah, but
not in the Middle East.
I don't know. Yeah. The family sock business was basically put out of business by UPS.
How so?
The family business was really a distributor. We didn't manufacture anything. We distributed. which meant we bought large quantities from the mills that made the socks, and then we packed them up into smaller boxes and sent them to the stores in quantities they could use. And this would include big department stores. I mean, not just the little mom and pop shops. Because the only way to get things was on a truck, and it cost a lot of money in freight. When UPS came in, and then when computers came in, all of a sudden, big department stores could have their computer automatically order their socks
Mm.
from Hill, who could ship it UPS in a small box.
Mm.
And between the two, they didn't need us.
Hmm. Interesting. I did. Grandpa didn't design them. I thought he designed and did the whole.
He was more of a designer than I'm not a designer. He was more of a designer than I was. He would pick things, he would design things, but that wasn't the key to the success. The key to the success was from the time he started his business, which was right after the war, World War II. Things were still being rationed, and he had the contacts to get the cotton to make the socks.
Wow.
Otherwise, you couldn't be in the business. So he would allocate the socks to a particular mill. They would make it for him, and he could sell. In those days, anything that people could make would be sold.
Right.
Okay, things have turned around. But anything, if you could make it, they would buy it.
Wow.
So he got his foot in, and he started doing some good business with a lot of good people, and then the whole thing grew. The same way it grew, it basically unraveled. Same plan.
Right. There's one last story about Grandpa that to me is one of those stories he loved telling, but maybe it's not the real story. That he got sued by Eddie Bauer at one point over because Grandpa's business was called Eddie's Socks.
No,
that's not true.
That's not true. What the real story was,
sued by Eddie Goldstein of Flatbush.
We wanted to patent or register the name Eddie Socks. Okay, so you go to these patent lawyers, and the lawyers do their searches, and they came up with Eddie Bauer has a registration or patent on that name. So, and they sell clothing. So this might be seen as an infringement. So there's two choices. You can go ahead and try to register it, at which point they can complain. You go to court, and if they win, you can no longer use Eddie Socks.
Right.
Or you can forget about registering it. They don't know you. You don't know them. Just keep on trucking, which is the direction he took.
So that's so weird. The story I got was he suing
Who's been
or
telling
not
you
suing.
These stories?
I don't know. That he actually met with Eddie. He met with Eddie Bauer, and he's like, "Oh, I sell to like the cheap stores. You sell to the other stores. We're in totally different things." And they shook on it, and that was it.
No,
never happened.
Two things you should know about your grandfather's success, is he had two licenses to sell different socks. One was Hopalong Cassidy.
Okay.
Hopalong Cassidy. He was
Sure.
the most popular cowboy movie and television star of the time, and he had that franchise, and he sold the heck out of it and made a very large amount of money.
Wow.
Okay. The second one he got was Captain Video, which really annoyed me because he met with him.
Oh no, and he didn't take you.
And he didn't take me. And the worst part was he said, "I didn't know you were interested."
Well,
every night at 6:30, your grandmother would call me into the kitchen to eat, and I'd say, "I can't come, Captain Video's on." And every night we'd have that battle, and he didn't know in meeting Captain Video.
All right. Well, I kind of had the same experience when I think my brother and I told you that we thought we were going to take over the sock business, and your response was, "If I knew that, I would have kept it going.
Really?
Really.
I might have looked at it differently. You see, your grandfather looked at one of the very smart things he did was he looked at the business because I had introduced computers to his business to make it more efficient.
Mm-hmm.
And so he looked at the business because after a while it was running fairly well by itself when I organized it like that. And I said, if you don't mind, in addition to what I'm doing here, I'm going to start a little computer company and sell these computers that I've been using to other people, which I did.
Right.
And he looked at things and said, I think you ought to concentrate on the computer business because that's where your future is, because it's not in the sock business. He didn't mean because I wasn't good at socks. It was the business was not going anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a good move, I mean, for me. And it was his push and support that got me there, which surprised the heck out of me because that wasn't normal for him. That was probably the most conversation we had that wasn't business related.
Hmm.
We had
Do you
lots of
think
conversations, but they were always, he was telling stories about his 50 years in the business.
do you think you said to me that grandpa wasn't, one example was, this show that you didn't get to meet the guy and he didn't know, uh, that he wasn't as attentive as you thought in your mind, um,
He
growing
wasn't
up.
attentive. He wasn't attentive to me at all. I mean, if you think about it now, he was a great sportsman in high school. He went to college for a little bit, but he didn't really go to college. He was a great sportsman in high school and probably could have been a semi-pro or a pro baseball player, but he was in the same class or gym class with Hank Bauer, who did go on to become the pro from his high school in
Mm.
Manhattan. So he was always into sports, and when he, got out of that and got too old, he was always listening to it on the radio, watching it on television. Now, one would have thought that with that kind of a interest, he would take me over to the schoolyard and play basketball or baseball or something. He never did it. He was always listening to it or watching it.
Do you,
And
do you
I
think it was
was,
bec-
I,
do you think it was because his mind was always in the business and he just needed to like unplug, and that's why he went into the sports, not playing, just
no, you don't know his father. You don't know your great grandfather. Um, and I really have no idea how their family was growing up. But knowing his father was always working, and in those days he had to, just to make a living.
Mhm.
Uh, it's probably the way he was brought up. Is his father didn't pay any attention to him.
Mhm.
They had three kids. He was the middle one. His older brother, really took care of him. He was only a couple of years older, but he took care of
Right.
him. If any of the bullies in the Bronx ever threatened my father, they had to deal with my uncle. And
Hmm.
Uh-huh.
he was a big guy. He didn't want to deal with him.
Bigger than grandpa.
Oh yeah,
Wow.
and more energetic in terms of
Uh-huh.
making things happen.
Mhm. And is that the brother he went to business with?
No, the brother that was in business was your my mother, your grandmother's brother. Actually, two of
No,
them.
I meant their last name used to be Stein.
Oh, yeah. That he had his own business.
Okay, but they just talk business together, I guess.
They talked business together. He was in the ladies' hosiery business, not the children's sock business.
Got it.
It's a completely different business, but they happen to have offices on the same floor of the same building because it was kind
Hmm.
of the way it works in New York. And the story they tell me, and I still have trouble believing it, is his brother, when he signed his name Stein, it looked like Stern. And they knew that your grandfather was his brother, so they called him Stern instead of Stein. So they finally changed their name, which makes no sense to me.
Well, it's still the story I tell, and I'm still tempted to change my name back. But well, time will tell.
And Stein's money, yes, I know.
Yeah, I know he kind of
And
ruined
Stein.
that. Yes,
That's
yes,
great.
that would probably be the main factor. I haven't done it yet.
Well, I mean, I guess that's a real name. It probably came over from Stein, from Europe. I just learned recently, and I've heard the story, but it didn't register until recently when I asked it for the 15th time. Your grandmother's name was Schwartz,
Yeah,
and that wasn't the name they had in Poland.
really?
Yeah, when they came over to Ellis Island, they were trying. The guy said, "What's your name?" And they said, "Charney." Charney means black.
Oh, I think I did know this actually.
Okay, so they what? Charney, black, Schwartz. Yeah. Oh, okay. Then it became Schwartz. It's like, okay, makes as much sense as anything else. But Stein was probably the name because it was understandable.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Nice. So yeah, so the last thing we like to leave everybody with, all our listeners, is some advice you would give. We have over 20% of our listeners are female. So any people that are considering divorce, thinking about divorce, gone through divorce, going through divorce, some advice you would give them, like if you were giving advice to yourself, or anything you've given other people during their process of going through divorce.
My whole attitude has changed because I listened on the radio for years to Dr. Laura Schlesinger. You agree with her? Okay, I mean, she has a lot of views I don't agree with. She has a lot of views I do agree with. And the one piece of advice she gave that still haunts me is if you have young kids, don't get divorced. If it's at all, I mean, there are circumstances where you can't avoid it. Don't get divorced. I don't know if I could have obeyed that advice at that time, but it might have made me think a different path than where I was stuck. The second piece of advice is if you have children under 18, don't get remarried. Which is another hard thing. And if you do get remarried, don't have kids. So I violated all of those
things. Why do you say that? Yeah.
Because and I when you listen to it, you have to agree. I mean, when you get married, you're now don't have much time for your original family. I mean, no matter what, you've got a new family. Your wife isn't going to be happy if you spend your whole time with the old family. It's just not going to work. So the only
that's
way
not just marriage. That's even. Wouldn't you say that's even in a committed monogamous relationship?
Yeah, right. I mean, if you want to date and everything, that's great. Don't introduce the kids. Don't let that interfere with your family relationship.
That's what I'm saying. A monogamous relationship can be just as distracting as a marriage, right? As a second marriage, right?
Oh, absolutely. You can't let that happen. Okay. I had various thoughts about that subject on and off the whole time, and she's giving me advice after the fact. But you can see how ultimately it's best for the kids.
Can one make the argument? I don't mean to interrupt your flow of tips and stuff to answer Ben's question, but could one make the argument that one has a right, quote unquote, to be happy? In other words, like somebody should put his life or her life on hold for let's say the kids are 6, and for whatever reason, the divorce happened, right? So we're at that stage. So somebody shouldn't be in a relationship until that 6-year-old becomes 18. Like they have to wait, 12 years to get into a relationship because of the kid. I mean, it's great and honorable, but I'm just playing, devil's advocate, so to speak, right? Like, what's the alternative?
Yeah, but I mean, I got to go back to the original premise. I didn't get a divorce because I wanted to be happy. I got a divorce because physically I was having a lot of problems.
Mm.
And I couldn't get them to go away.
Mm.
Okay, and I was getting very, just call it sick if you want. And I had to get away so I could heal. All right. If I could have stayed, my physical condition would have let me stay, I would have stayed. So I really didn't have a choice. But as far as new relationships were concerned, I might have taken a different path if I had that advice earlier.
That's what I'm curious, like, to be alone until your kids turned 18.
I doubt if that would have happened, but at least maybe taken a slower route, concentrated more on the kids, and made sure that was a good situation for them.
I mean, you certainly lived with a few people that I remember.
That's a whole other story we don't want to get into at this point.
I know, but I'm saying you have the experience to give the retroactive advice.
Yes, that's true. Okay. So I don't even know where to go from
there. I mean, I can tell you for me, some of those people had kids, and my interactions with these, they were just, I don't know, different kids that weren't my family. And there were certain situations that never should have happened. And I'm sure it was difficult for you trying to, quote unquote, father those kids, and then me come sometimes and father me in that mix.
Absolutely, and also your two brothers. I mean, they were involved in all that. But yes, then that certainly made it worse. So,
and then it's going to sound weird, but I'm sure on some level I felt probably like I wasn't enough, and you found some other family to make you happy, and we weren't enough, or something on that level.
well, I can see how you might feel that way. It was never was that way, but I can see how you feel that way.
So,
And which goes back to the try to keep it out. Don't have that happen. It's not a good thing. And of course, in those days, I was much more active in a lot of different ways. So I thought I could handle all these things, which of course I couldn't. So, but I'm, you think you're smarter than you are.
You also said, back to Ben's question, you said that had you known earlier about Ben's situation, you would have flown in or whatnot, right? Like, is that more like on a practical level, like sort of show him the ropes, so to speak, and, just protecting himself or whatnot? Is it on like an emotional basis? Like, what did you mean by that? I was curious to ask you before.
Well, the reaction was emotional. I heard about it. I said, I got to go. But there wasn't any logic there. It was just, I got to go.
My brothers were the same. I remember that. They were like, because they also, I did not tell my family. I myself, I mean, I didn't really, I knew, but I didn't really believe it. I think that it was happening. So I didn't tell my family till the very end. And their reaction was like, they want to hop on a plane. But by that point I was like, why? My parents came, but it was also COVID was happening. It was like right before COVID actually, but anyway, sorry. So yeah, so you were saying that it was emotional, like just to.
It was emotional, and as a bonus more than anything else, I had a lot of experience that would be helpful.
Right.
But I knew he needed me around, which is
Yeah.
a weird thought because he never expressed that.
How did it make you feel that to see your son going through what you had gone through so many years earlier, and he was married for so long and thank God 5 kids. Like how was that for you as a father?
Terrible. Terrible. You want to do, your son's in pain, you want to help. You want to make it go away. That's all there is to it. You can say children, but they're all boys.
Yeah, I mean, to me, the different reactions from my own parents and my new parents could not be further apart. So I thank you. That shocked me when you said you wanted to hop on a plane, because I know you don't fly.
There's very little that'll get me on a plane these days.
Right. And also my mother had a similar reaction. She couldn't fly, but she reached out to make her voice heard. And which is why I guess I was so shocked that other people involved in the situation were not as receptive. And I thought I was crazy that I was expecting that, because your parents, again, I don't know what the dynamics were, but your parents always stayed involved with my mother, I'm assuming because they didn't want to lose their grandchildren. But you guys were also very...
They liked her more than they liked me. I don't know.
Whatever. Right. So again, they were very supportive, either strategically or I don't know, but like I was expecting the same. And when that didn't happen, it was like an extra shock to me. Well, thank you, Dad, for doing this. I know it wasn't on your top of list of things to do. So we do appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
And this you're going to have to edit out. On top of my list of things to do was to get you to talk. Because for the last 40 years, whatever it is, there hasn't been that much. And talking is good. So I learned a lot. I hope you learned something. And I'm still proud of you. And you continue to be more successful every day in one of your many endeavors on top of that. In many of your endeavors, really. So I do pay attention. I am proud of you. I'd be prouder if you were in the Bronx, but it's a long way to Israel. I don't even like to go to Manhattan. So I was very, very happy when you came over and we could spend time together. See the kids. Great group. Doing a great job with them.
Yes, he is.
So that's where I'm at.
Beautiful. And thank you so much, Mr. Stern. Appreciate it.
Good to talk to you. Good to see you talk, by the way.
Yeah.
Just put me in front of an audience.
You got to watch out for this kid. He takes over.
And thank you for all listening. This has been the Too Dad to Quit podcast, and we will see you next week.
This podcast provides a platform for our guests to express their own personal views and opinions. Some or all of these views and opinions may not be shared by Ben and or Yoel.
Thank you for listening to the Too Dad to Quit podcast. Available at toodadtoquit.com. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next episode.